Thanks for joining us here today. I know many of you traveled from well outside of the D.C. area. Really excited to have such a wonderful group and a wonderful group of leaders and having this discussion about clean energy and the opportunities through science, innovation, and jobs. I'm Greg Nelson with the White House Office of Public Engagements. I work on energy and technology issues there, and it's wonderful to have you all here. And special thanks to all of our friends at the Department of Energy for their work in putting together this amazing briefing, this amazing opportunity. We've got a great group of speakers here today, and lots of time for Q&A, lots of opportunity for you all to engage with the speakers and make sure that we're looking at ways to build this together. We're really excited about having you all here to help us learn from the work you're doing and talk a little bit about what the administration has been doing. So to lead us off, I want to introduce my boss, Valerie Jarrett, the Senior Advisor to the President. Valerie?
Thank you, Greg, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the White House. We are just delighted to have you here, and we have a terrific program lined up for you this morning. This is a big week for energy and clean energy reform. As you guys know, the president was at MIT last Friday making an announcement about innovation, and of course he was in Florida yesterday at a huge solar plant announcing our investment of $3.4 billion in smart grid. And so we're off and running, and our hope is that we can engage you, and many of you have been a part of this process for a while, and for the newcomers, welcome. We really want your advice, your counsel, and your support as we move forward to creating all new forms of renewable energy. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that we have all of the most up-to-date information that you guys have and that we're sharing with you as clearly and as precisely as we can our thought process so that this really does become the public-private partnership that I think we all would seek. And so we have, as you know, Carol Bronner will be here in a hot second. We have Steven Chu coming, and we're hoping in the course of the day that we really have an interactive dialogue with you. So with that, I'm hoping Carol is actually here. We have a new room, I should tell you. This is like brand new, like in the last couple of weeks. Some of you might have been here last week. And we just found we have a green room backstage, and so we're getting all of the logistics out. But what I don't know is like how you get a high signal. So if she doesn't come right out, she'll be out in 2 seconds. But welcome me in advance. Welcome Carol for me in advance. Carol Bronner. Hold the thought. She'll be right back.
Soft shoe or something? I'm not Carol Browner, but I do a nice soft shoe. If anybody wants to see that. I got people mocking me.
Good morning, and I apologize for being late. Got stuck in a meeting. So I guess I can thank Valerie for that introduction. Valerie always does a great job, and she's a great person to get to work with as we reach out to the business community. So let me thank you all for taking the time to join us here. It is certainly interesting times in Washington, lots of things going on when we talk about clean energy and creating a different energy future and creating a whole new generation of clean energy jobs. Yesterday I was with the president when he traveled to Florida to the largest PV solar plant in the country, where we announced $3.4 billion in Department of Energy grants. Very exciting. It was the single largest Recovery Act announcement of the year. And it's going to leverage something on the order of $4.7 billion in $4.7 billion in private investments for a total of almost a little bit more than $8 billion. We think it will create tens of thousands of jobs as this money starts to roll out the door. Some of these are new projects. Some of these are projects that are moving into their second and third phase, and so those jobs can be created more quickly. And What's so exciting about the smart grid announcement is the types of projects that we'll be investing in, that Department of Energy will be investing in, which will really allow us to bring the grid into sort of the modern era. The president likes to say that we're still using a grid that was largely designed by Thomas Edison. And if you think about how many things in our lives have changed because of new technologies, the idea that electricity is still being delivered to us in the old-fashioned way really doesn't make any sense. And so a lot of yesterday's awardees will be putting in place the technologies, the modern technologies that will allow us to manage more wisely our electricity, will give consumers, both households and families, choices about how they use their energy. We think that this will allow consumers to use less energy than they're currently using when they have smart meters in their homes. It will also allow the utility companies to manage their electricity better, and it'll allow us to bring the renewables that are so important to a clean energy future onto line and bring it from the places like where we were yesterday, which was a beautiful location. I'm from Florida. It's always nice to be in Florida, but it was in the middle of nowhere. And so we need to bring that power to the people, to the population centers. We're also heavily engaged in the debate here in Washington about comprehensive energy reform. The first thing the president did when he came to office was obviously the Recovery Act, and we think that's an important down payment for a different energy future, $80 billion in total, and we've been spending that, as you know. But now we're turning to how do we get the legislation that the president asked for from the first time he addressed Congress. And what he's asked for is really three things in comprehensive energy legislation. First is give us the tools to break our dependence on foreign oil. The second is give you all, the businesses, the certainty and predictability so that you can make the investments and thereby help us create a whole new generation of clean energy jobs. And finally, we need to put a cap on the dangerous pollutants that contribute to climate change, the greenhouse gases. As you're probably aware, a bill has already passed out of the House of Representatives. As I say to my friends who work on, my colleagues who work on healthcare, that puts us ahead of the healthcare debate. We're actually done in one chamber. And yesterday we had, I think, about 6 or 7 administration officials actually testify before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, which has jurisdiction over a portion of comprehensive energy legislation. And so we're up and running there. The Energy Committee, Mr. Bingham's committee, has already passed out a bill that includes some important provisions on renewable electricity requirements, some provisions on nuclear loan guarantees, all of which we think are important. What Senator Boxer is focused on is the Kerry-Boxer bill, which is really the climate change portion of the bill. We frequently get asked, will we have this comprehensive energy legislation done by the time the global negotiations on climate change happen in Copenhagen, the sort of the beginning to middle of December. We would certainly like that to be the case. We are working hard to make that the case, but the legislative calendar is, the days are sort of flying by as healthcare has consumed more time than we had originally anticipated. Some people suggest that if we don't have it done, that makes our life in Copenhagen difficult. We will manage. We would prefer to have it done, but if we don't have it done by then, we do have all of the work we've been doing here domestically, the work that people like Kathy Zoy are doing at the Department of Energy in terms of modernizing all of our appliance standards, the work that Lisa Jackson and Ray LaHood have done at EPA and DOT, proposing the toughest ever CAFE car fuel efficiency standards. Congress had said get to 35 miles per gallon by model year 2020. Working with the car companies, in partnership with the car companies, with the labor unions, we were able to reach an agreement of 35.5 miles per gallon in 2016. And set the first ever national greenhouse gas emission standards for automobiles. And we have stories like that that can be told across the government where we're using our executive authority while we work in Congress to achieve the kind of legislation that we think will be important going forward. So it's exciting times when you are in this world of clean energy. Lots going on, still lots to do. Obviously, we can't do this alone. We need your input. We need your involvement. You all have been great partners in this effort, and hopefully we can continue to build that partnership and to learn from you all as we try and do what we think is important for this country and for future generations. And is Steve Chu here? No. Is he coming? Oh, okay. Why don't I take some questions till he gets here? Obviously, we're having scheduling issues today in the Obama administration, so I'd be happy to answer any questions. And maybe if you don't mind identifying yourself.
Sure. Mike Lawrence with Johns Manville. Question is, we have CAFE standards for automobiles, and we feel good about that, and I applaud the steps that we're taking. But we don't have that for buildings, which produce 40% of the greenhouse gases. Is that something that's being looked into or discussed?
So the bill that passed out of the House, which is commonly referred to as the Waxman-Markey bill, and Jeff Bingaman's bill do include building standards, and it would, they're slightly different. I don't think the differences are insurmountable. In addition to that, we were able to secure funding in the Recovery Act and the stimulus for upgrades in existing building stock. We are looking at a number of ideas right now to see if there are some other things that perhaps we could do for existing buildings. There was a pilot project announced last week between HUD and DOE. I think, is it called PACE? It's a retrofit ramp up. It had an acronym at one point. I don't know if the acronym survived. That one's more. There's one focused both on existing buildings, and there's also one focused on homeowners and giving homeowners some opportunities to borrow money to make the kind of upgrades. And in this instance, the idea is that that loan, rather than riding with the owner of the house who might sell the house before they fully paid back the loan and realized all of the benefits, actually rides with the house. So if they do sell the house, the subsequent owner, who's also going to get the benefits of the new windows or the insulation or the new HVAC system. We're also excited. We have some evidence. We won't know till taxes are filed, but that the tax credits we got, again, for some of the retrofits, that people are taking advantage of them. The evidence we have, again, we can't, we need to see the tax returns, but what we're seeing is window companies are now ramping up their hiring because they're getting a bigger demand, and windows are, some windows, certain types of windows are covered by the tax credits we got for private home retrofits. So we agree with you that buildings, both new and existing, are important, that the big commercial real estate is extremely important, universities, other public, hospitals, things like that. And so we've been looking at some ideas and some things that might make sense going forward. Mm-hmm.
Solutions. We're a nonprofit that works to help the trucking industry become more efficient. You mentioned the CAFE standards. Are you looking at implementing anything similar for the diesel trucking industry, which consumes 10% of U.S. energy, or implementing something like smart way regulations nationwide as they've done in California?
EPA is looking at what they can do in terms of the bigger parts of the fleet. There's also the bigger trucks in the fleet. The Hill has been very interested in some of the natural gas fleet proposals, and I think Bingaman may actually have included some provisions for natural gas in his bill. I think it's likely that some more will be added during the Senate debate. So I think there's more to come on that. I'm not familiar with the California program, and I probably should be, and I will make myself familiar. Perfect. Any other? Yes.
Sean Todd, Fox Potomac Resources. Everyone, I think, hopes cap and trade does pass through the Senate, but in case it doesn't, to what degree will the administration push and danger, and how will that determine the future course of cap and trade in terms of federal policy?
Right, so let me just back up for a second and sort of put your question in maybe a slightly broader context. There was a Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, I guess 2 years ago now, that found that EPA has the authority under existing law, under the existing Clean Air Act, to regulate greenhouse gases if they determine that greenhouse gases are an endangerment to public health and welfare. EPA is in the process of making that decision. Is sometimes referred to as the endangerment determination. They have not yet made it. They had hoped to complete that work sooner than now, but they received such a large quantity of public comments that they are reading through and they respond to in the public record that gets created. It doesn't mean if you sent one in, you get a letter back, but they have to sort of respond to all of them in the public record. If EPA, and it is their decision, if EPA does find that greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, they, under this Supreme Court decision, would then have to regulate greenhouse gases from cars. They wouldn't have a choice, the way the law and the decision came down. But obviously, they're already working with the Department of Transportation to put in place the first ever greenhouse gas regulations for cars. After that, they would start to look through other sectors, large emitters. And in anticipation of that, a few weeks ago, EPA put out a proposed rule. They refer to it sometimes as the tailoring rule. The way the Clean Air Act is written, and Congress was concerned that if you had an inactive EPA when it came to conventional pollutants, no one was thinking about greenhouse gases in 1990, but rather just your ordinary, conventional pollutants, that if you had an inactive EPA, they wanted to set a base above which the pollutant would be regulated. So the number that's in the law says 250 tons or more per year, and you're automatically regulated. Well, for greenhouse gases, 250 tons is a very, very low threshold. Some of your homes may actually emit 250 tons a year. You probably didn't know that, but if you have a large home and you're lots of pools and things like that, you could be emitting at that level. So what EPA is trying to do is raise that threshold. And that's what's called the tailoring rule, so that when if they do end up looking to regulate under the Clean Air Act, they're only regulating the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, very, very large buildings, most things that are already regulated under the Clean Air Act, not trying to bring in anything new. You'll hear sometimes the naysayers and the opponents of doing anything on greenhouse gas reduction say, well, EPA is going to be out there regulating Dunkin' Donuts, and obviously nobody thinks that's what should happen. And so they're working to put in place the parameters if we end up in a situation where we're without the kind of legislation that the president thinks is important. The thing about the EPA authority is, again, it wasn't designed for greenhouse gases, and so everyone recognizes that new law would actually give us better tools, and the tool we most want is the trading mechanisms. When I was at EPA in the 90s, we set up and launched the Asset Rain program, which has been hugely successful in using market mechanisms to achieve cost-effective reductions in SO2 emissions. The reductions have been achieved at a fraction of the cost that had been anticipated in the late 80s. The electric utility industry did a study, and they said if you put a cap on SO2 from the electric utility coal-fired plants in the Northeast, it's going to cost about $1,000 per ton of reduction. Using these market mechanisms, we drove the cost down to $200 to $300 per ton because we were able to find the cheapest way to get there. And so that's the mechanism we want to use in this instance, because what it does is it really allows you all, the private sector, to sort of use your innovative skills, your ingenuity to find the best answers, and it creates markets for new technologies and helps to give that certainty and predictability that you all need to make those investments to find those new technologies and bring them to market. So we continue to believe that that is the better way to go. And I have to say, I've been in and out of Washington over the last 20 years, and I worked on the Hill for several years. When I was at EPA, we passed 2 major pieces of legislation. So I've watched the legislative process, and I don't know how many of you watch it closely, but if you do, you'll know there's sort of that tipping point where suddenly the conversations start to change, and so we no longer have the conversations of, well, if, or it's never going to happen, to, well, when it happens. And so as I say to people, we've sort of now all gotten onto the same, we're all on the same field, we're about to all play the same game. And so there's a way to see this comprehensive energy legislation that the President has called for becoming a reality. It may take us a little bit longer than we had hoped for, but we're having some very, very positive conversations on the Hill. And just as one example, you may have seen 2 weeks ago the op-ed by John Kerry and Lindsey Graham talking about the bipartisan nature. And we've had a lot of conversations with Mr. Graham and with other Republicans, and do feel like there are some bipartisan opportunities here that are very, very encouraging.
Hi, my name is Guy Warner. I'm with Pareto Energy. We're developing a electric power microgrid here in the district. I wanted to pause before my question and applaud the administration for the action yesterday. I don't think people know how daunting it is to read 400 applications and over 100 in 2 months.
People like that.
With that being said, our approach is a little bit different. It involves grid independence. So we're not so much about rebuilding the smart grid as we're representing towns and energy users who want to largely get off the grid, rely on it solely for backup power. I'm wondering what kinds of complementary kinds of incentives might be available for our efforts.
So can you just explain a little bit more about your business model?
Well, it's a microgrid, so energy users would come together, build install combined heat and power and renewable energy at or near its point of use.
Got it.
Here in the district, we're installing that on the Howard University campus, then distributing power to hospitals and universities. We're able to do our own frequency and voltage control, load balancing, demand response we do below the grid, and we rely on the grid just for backup, trying to help the grid relieve some of the overcrowding and stress.
And so it was, so as in the $80 billion that was in the Stimulus Act for clean energy, I would imagine that the efficiency money that's been going to the states and some of the efficiency money that went to the federal, to like GSA to upgrade our existing building infrastructure might provide some opportunities for you all. The state money is moving out now. The states had to put in place programs to receive the money, so it took a little bit of time, but, and I'm sure the District of Columbia is participating in that. The issue of the combined heat and power, that is an issue that it goes to the question, I guess the first question, that is an issue that we've been trying to look at to see what else could the federal government do to really incentivize some of that. And
You mentioned Edison. That's the way Edison envisioned the grid, really.
Right.
Really, Edison didn't design the current architecture of the grid. He envisioned the use of power at or near its point of use. It was his rivals who designed it in this fashion. I think that the efforts are complementary. I mean, getting off grid now is short term, can bring the solution now. We've heartily applaud the rebuilding of the grid as a whole, but I think it's going to take longer. We have energy users ready to act right now.
Well, when the companies that received some of the grants yesterday for particularly the smart meters, both the business and residential smart meters, the funding that was released yesterday should get us to about 18 million of these. But what the companies are saying is that they think that the demand, because of that 18 million, could be as much as 40 million smart meters, which would be huge if we're able to achieve that. So we're going to be watching carefully.
Thank you.
Following on the lines of distributed power, my name is Kent Bakke. I own Continuum Energy Solutions. We do solar energy installations. Is there an opportunity maybe for a clean energy bank for clean energy, like you talked about for energy efficiency?
So in the Recovery Act, there are the loan guarantees that we were able to get, and those are starting to move out. Going forward, there is a discussion both in the House and the Senate about creating a clean energy bank that would have almost a revolving fund in it. It's the House and Senate have come at it very differently, and I think we'll have to just work through how to bridge those differences. But if I had to guess, I would say it's highly likely that comprehensive energy legislation will include some sort of clean energy bank. I think there's a lot of interest, and it wasn't controversial. Once it was proposed, people were sort of open to the idea and embraced it. I think there's just different where the controversy may lie, and it's not huge. It's just how do you do it? Do you do it at the Department of Treasury? Do you do it at the Department of Energy? How does it revolve? Who runs it on a day-to-day basis? There's some questions like that to be looked at in the back.
Hey,
Right here. I'll do it right here.
Go for it.
Carrie Serve from Plains Justice. We're a nonprofit that provides energy and environmental legal services to Northern Plains communities. And particularly in the region where we work, we are hearing, even from the most progressive elements in the agricultural sector, a lot of concern that there will be a disproportionate impact from any cap and trade regime on agriculture. And I wonder first, does the administration accept that conclusion? And if so, what would the administration propose to do to address it?
We actually think, and I'll quote Tom Vilsack here, our Secretary of Agriculture, that there are tremendous opportunities for the agriculture sector through the offsets program. The House bill includes a provision that was crafted by the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Peterson, obviously someone who's very responsive to the needs of rural and agricultural America. And what he created was an offsets program which would allow farmers to undertake certain practices that would help to sequester carbon and be paid for those activities. So if I'm an emitter of greenhouse gases, I have some choices. I can go buy some credits, I can work with a farmer, there'll be a program set up, I wouldn't work directly with the farmer to achieve some offsets for my emissions through changes in the farmer's activities, or I can install new technology, I can fuel switch. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have the broadest set of opportunities in terms of achieving the reductions, because that will give us the most cost-effective reductions. I think in the near term, many people much smarter than me would say that the agriculture offsets will be some of the most cost-effective offsets, and I think that is a real opportunity for farmers. I think sometimes what you hear from the farming community is that some of their input costs are going to go up. So for example, fertilizer costs could go up, energy costs could go up. I think, you know, Tom Vilsack again feels that on balance, a offsets program and a cap and trade program is a net benefit to farmers.
Carol, Jigar Shah, founder of Sun Edison. I'm curious, Department of Energy has done a lot of incredible work showing that the $3.4 billion of smart grid meters will save a lot of energy, as well as the energy efficiency programs from the weatherization programs, et cetera. And largely it'll alleviate the need for the 16,000 megawatts of new coal that are on the books. I'm trying to figure out if states end up making illogical choices to put into rate base 50-year assets when at the same time we're subsidizing energy efficiency and smarter use of energy. Does the administration have an approach to actually figure out a way to bring more logic to this process so we're not struck with stranded costs for the next 50 years on some of these assets?
You're talking about on the coal assets.
Well, coal and other centralized generation assets. I mean, these distributed energy programs, from weatherization to smart grid to solar to fuel cells to other things, are really taking off in a big way. And you know, if we're stuck with these stranded assets, many of which, if they're approved now, won't get built to 2017 or 2018 anyway.
Well, there aren't a lot of coal-fired power plants being approved. I mean, we have to back up for a second and remember how the system works, right? The decision is largely left to the states in terms of whether or not that electricity is needed and whether or not those costs can be passed on to the rate payers. There are various states have sort of been saying no, others have been sort of slow walking things in the queue, but there aren't a lot of coal-fired power plants about to be built. I mean, there may be a handful that had been on the, you know, sort of the drawing board for a long time. I think part of what you're asking also goes to what role should FERC play in the future. And, you know, as you're aware, FERC is an independent agency, so we don't get involved in sort of telling them how they should do their business. But I think you've got a good chairman over there, you've got good members over there who are trying to think through some of these issues and how do we integrate it. But I also think that going back to the state level, having come out of state government, where I worked very closely with the PSC in Florida, you know, these commissioners, they're getting well informed about the changing realities of energy and electricity production in this country, and I think we're starting to see better quality of decisions coming out of them. I mean, everything's changing rapidly, and so, you know, not everyone's moving quite as quickly as some others, but I'm more optimistic about state PUCs and PSCs sort of sorting this through in a thoughtful way.
Carol, as you know, this is being live streamed on the web.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but how do you guys on the web?
On Facebook about other ideas and a lot of conversation around transportation. I wonder if, including an idea to put pressure pads at highway tolls so that you can spin a turbine to generate electricity. electricity.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that before, but I'll go back to my EPA days, where when it comes to conventional air pollutants, it's, we'd rather cars sort of move at a steady speed than slow down and accelerate. We get less pollution when they're moving at a steady speed. So I'm not quite sure I understand that technology, but I think we're probably, from a conventional pollutant perspective, you're probably like an easy pass system. So, we're not stopping at the tolls, right? Is that what that suggestion is?
That's right.
I don't know. Does anyone know what this is? I don't know what it is. Do you know what it is?
One of the implementations at the Port of Oakland, so those big heavy trucks.
Oh, it's for the trucks, not for cars.
Well, it could be for cars too, but they create some energy when they roll over a bar, right? So believe it or not, their movement
Oh, so
can
it's not
actually
energy
generate
for,
power.
it's not like a plug-in hybrid. They're not trying to, oh, I misunderstood. They're not trying to recharge the car, the truck battery. They're generating power that's going to the,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Gotcha.
I didn't understand
I
that.
think broadly, just thinking about transportation's role in this and some of the investments that the administration's made in batteries and some of the alternative vehicles.
When we were putting together during the transition, the soon-to-be administration's thoughts on the energy portions of the Recovery Act, we tried to think about sort of the various component parts. So we thought about transportation, we thought about renewables, we thought about efficiencies. And in the transportation arena, we thought about the advanced technologies, the batteries, and we've DOE is in the process of making pretty significant investments in battery technologies. You saw yesterday that the vice president went to a really shuttered GM plant in, I want to say, was it in Delaware? Someone help me here. Was it in Delaware? Yeah. To announce a grant that will reopen that, and it's a plug-in, a hybrid technology. And while, as we're all keenly aware, that technology is still pretty pricey, the hope is that that facility will be able to bring that technology into a more affordable, sort of regular, family sized sedan. Certainly, the electrification of our transportation sector is a hugely important part of how we go about reducing greenhouse gases. And the good news is, and as you all are probably aware of this, the number of companies with large fleets who are starting to make different choices. I was with 6 different companies recently: Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Staples, PG&E. I can't remember the rest of them. All of whom had placed orders for electric local, big delivery trucks, like the things that come to the grocery store in your neighborhood. They sort of do 100, 125 miles a day. Not the UPS size. These are bigger tractor trailers, but these would be all electric vehicles. And it was an interesting conversation. To a company, they were just thrilled to be a part of this. And these are jobs that I think it's a UK company that's coming here to Missouri to build these. And the thing I found most interesting is they were doing it because they really believe that we should have a cap on greenhouse gases and that we are going to have a cap on greenhouse gases. And so as a business decision, they wanted to get in front of that. And I think you all are at the forefront of helping businesses like those think differently about their energy use and think differently about sort of what the opportunities are. And as I said earlier, we can't thank you enough for your interest in this, for your commitment to this, and most importantly, I think for everything you've done to date and everything you're going to do as we work to realize the President's vision of a different energy future, a clean energy future. And so again, thank you. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chu. We used to be able to say the only man in the administration with a Nobel Prize, but now he has company, although he hasn't actually picked up his Nobel Prize yet, right? So Steve just told me so he's still the only man with a Nobel Prize. But Steve is Secretary Chu is doing a phenomenal job at the Department of Energy and really deserves virtually all of the credit for the moving out the Recovery Act money. He's put together a great team, Matt Rogers, Kathy Zoy, others over there who are really, really taking, it's one thing to get the $80 billion, it's another thing to figure out how to spend it wisely and how to spend it quickly. And so, Steve, I thank you for everything you guys are doing over at the Department of Energy, and I give you Dr. Steve Chu.
thank you all. I just want to fiddle-faddle with this while I plug it in. It's a pleasure to be here, and let me just get this going. I do these things hand to mouth. All right, hopefully it's there. Okay, great. All right, so let me talk to you about what we have at stake in terms of the clean energy future. Fundamentally, my message is that we have an opportunity to lead the world in what has to be a new industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution gave us energy that supplanted human and animal energy, and it created great wealth. The second one has to give us this energy and even more of it, but in a much cleaner way. We have to decrease our dependency on foreign oil. In doing so, we can increase American competitiveness, not only by decreasing our dependency on foreign oil, but for reasons you'll certainly hear about, and we've got to mitigate climate change. We're now importing, well, up until the recession, we were importing over 60% of our oil, and that trend, when we get out of the recession, would continue, and so this is one issue. In terms of how we're doing in the staking our claim to the clean energy race, this is one example. This is plotted in the black curve, is the market share of photovoltaics made by the United States. The United States invented silicon photocells and photocells in general. We had 45% of the market share, but now it's about 7%. This is one example, one industry, but we're behind in other energy technologies or technologies in general that we really helped invent. Automobile fuel efficiency, we're behind in. If you have a hybrid car, chances are 99% chance that the battery has been made in Asia. Electricity transmission, the first transmission distribution system was introduced by Edison, and now we're woefully behind in that. Power electronics, our engineering schools don't train power engineers anymore. Industry, we don't have any market share in for example, large power transformers. Nuclear power, first reactor built in the United States, again, we're behind in that. We are losing the lead in manufacturing, but what's most alarming to me is we're losing the lead in high-tech manufacturing. High-tech manufacturing is defined as aerospace, pharmaceuticals, test equipment, electronics. The United States was the leader, followed by European Union. This is Japan, and who's taken over is China. So now what is China doing about clean energy? 2 months ago, Secretary Locke and I visited China. We had the privilege of meeting with the Premier of China for about 45 minutes. He said something I never heard before in the leadership in China. He said, if we continue as business as usual, climate change would be devastating to China and the rest of the world. Our increase in our use of fossil fuel, our carbon emissions, is unsustainable, and so we're going to do something about it. So what are they doing about it? Well, they have very aggressive targets for renewables, 100 gigawatts by 2020 for wind. They're planning gigawatt-scale photovoltaics. The wind and the photovoltaics, in large part, is in the western part of China. Their population centers are in the eastern part of China, so they're going to be spending money for ultra-high voltage transmission lines to bring the renewables across their country. They've installed a 1,000,000-volt DC line already. They're installing a 800 kilovolt DC line. They've installed a 1,000,000-volt AC line. They're working to integrate these things, and meanwhile, they're designing a 1 million volt, plus or minus 1 million volt DC line. Their 800 kilovolt line is meant to port energy over 1,900 kilometers with about a 6% energy loss. About the same as we do for a few hundred miles. So, and their plan is $44 billion by 2012, $88 billion by 2020. When asked, when I was talking to the president of this company called State Grid. It's a state-owned company, a conglomerate. I said, this is very expensive. How are you getting people willing to pay for it? And he says, of course people don't like the government reaching in and taking money out of their pockets, but we explain to them how important this is. So I'm explaining to you how important this is. What about mitigating climate change? The temperature is rising. This is a measure of direct temperatures from 1880 to 2008. Actually, direct temperature measurements go back to 1850. It shows essentially the same trend. The reason I'm showing this is it's an update. The reason I'm showing the update is there's been a lot of talk about the plateauing of the temperature and possibly a decrease in the temperature rise. And so I just merely want to point out that it would be a little surprising if this were completely just a straight line rise, because after all, in the previous history, we have had times, for example, here and over here, where it's gone down. Now, we don't fully understand why it's gone down. It's a very complex interaction with the ocean currents and with solar activity. But I will assert that if you take any 20 or 30-year period, no self-respecting scientist will ever say there's an unmistakable trend here. That's why it took the IPCC and other agencies, other study groups, so long to really say that the climate is changing. Now, it turns out we have gone into a solar minimum in the last 5 years, and we're just pulling out of it. There's a very weak correlation between that, but again, we don't fully understand it. So anyway, now if it really continues to go down for the next 25 years, then that would simply say our climate models need a little work. So you know, my money is in the next 5 or 10 years it will come back up, but we'll see. Here's why there's such concern. This is a record over the past 800,000 years of carbon dioxide, and actually this record is a good proxy for what the temperature was doing. When carbon dioxide was high, the temperature was high. When the carbon dioxide was low, the temperature was low. This has to do with natural cycles in the tilt of the Earth, not the solar cycles and the change in intensity of the sun or the sunspot activity, which are very coincident, but more, if the Earth is more tilted and there's a longer, more severe winter, there's time to build up ice caps and things of that nature. But the point I'm trying to make here is that where we are today in carbon dioxide level is beyond the scale of what happened in the last 800,000 years, in fact, beyond the scale of what happened in the last 2 million years. If you go back 50, 100 million years ago, it's not, but 50, 100 million years ago, the world was a very, very different place. And the Kyoto level of emissions, 550 parts per million, would put us here, and a business as usual scenario would put us here. So this is well beyond this scale. 0 is actually down here. This is not a shrunken scale. So we are in new territory. Oh, by the way, the time scale of this shift is about equal to the width of that line, okay? Or it's narrower, because that first tick mark is 100,000 years. And the times when the Earth evolved are, so it's quite slow. So all of a sudden we're seeing something that would possibly change in a gnat's eyelash. And so if we continue in a business as usual scenario, there are reports. For example, the IPCC report says there's a 50% probability we will be exceeding 4.5 degrees Kelvin. Well, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but going from here to here in the Ice Age period, that's about minus 6 degrees Kelvin, 5 to 6 degrees Kelvin. In that time, the Earth, Canada, and the United States, and Ohio, Pennsylvania were covered year-round in ice. So 5 or 6 degrees Kelvin means that big a difference. So 5 or 6 degrees Kelvin the other way means an equally profound difference. And this is a profound difference that could occur in 100 years. And that's just the beginning, because the debt of the carbon dioxide takes hundreds of years to go away, so it will continue to get worse. Other reports say even worse things. A more updated report of MIT says there's a 50% chance we'll be exceeding 5 degrees centigrade. So it's not a slim chance. It's a significant chance if we continue in business as usual. These high temperatures, we're afraid, might trigger nonlinear tipping points. Very quickly, an example of a nonlinear tipping point is the following. In the northern latitudes, when biomass grows and it then dies and decays, that carbon is not rapidly recycled. In a tropical rainforest, the microbes are very active and alive, and they come out and they turn that vegetation into carbon dioxide, methane, and other byproducts. So the carbon cycles very quickly. In the northern tundra, it doesn't cycle very much at all because the microbes are frozen. But that tundra is thawing out. And when the tundra thaws, the microbes come to life. You know this from personal experience. You take a piece of food, put it in a freezer, it can be stored for months. You take that same food, put it in the refrigerator, after it thaws, it can keep for a few days, and then it rots. So a very small change in temperature, it's that change between freezing and thawing that actually marks the activity of the microbes. And so the fear is that there's more carbon. We actually don't know how much more carbon, but it could be a factor of 2 times more carbon in the tundra than in the atmosphere, the total carbon in the atmosphere today. If this starts thawing, it releases carbon dioxide, methane, more greenhouse gases, more warming, more release of greenhouse gases, and then it's out of our control because this rate of increase could exceed our current carbon emissions, so we no longer have control over it. So that's what they call a tipping point. That's why the climate scientists have gotten even more concerned. Locally, there are local predictions of what might happen. A recent report of NOAA, which is a compendium of many other reports. This is one example. It shows that when you see blue, you see higher precipitation. When you see gray, you see lower precipitation. And in the winter and spring, there's higher precipitation, especially the early spring. The rainfalls are predicted to come down more in downpours. And so where floods of the century would have occurred before, they would be not floods of a century, but floods of a decade. And in the summertime, then you see decreased precipitation. That plus the increased temperatures during this, significantly increased temperatures during the summertime means that the grain belt, a lot of which is not actively irrigated, will go dry. And so that's another one of the local fears. And so for that reason, it's projected, again, if we continue a business as usual model, the United States and the grain belt would be severely water stressed. We're getting rains not the way we want them as downpours, but in the winter and early spring. This is a more global map of that type of water stress. Very high stress is this dark brown, the yellow is high stress, and you see the United States lights up, sadly, quite nicely in this, but so do other parts of the world. All right, so let me give you my projection of what might happen in the coming decade or two. I think the price of oil will go up. It's, of course, going to fluctuate in ways that we can't predict, but in the long run, because we are transitioning more and more to offshore oil that's harder to reach, and because of the increased demand by the developing countries, just that fact alone suggests that the price of oil will go up. Some 30 or 40%, I've been told, of the oil now is coming from offshore sources. And we will live in a carbon-constrained world. The fact that the Premier of China says that climate change, the way we're heading, is totally unsustainable tells us that the developing countries are quickly waking up to this fact. And so, given these two facts, this is why we want to get off dependency off of foreign oil. And if we're going to live in a carbon-constrained world, we will have to develop technologies that the world will need in order to go in this direction, that second industrial revolution. So this is something I'm sure some of you have heard me say already, but when asked why Wayne Gretzky was such a great hockey player, he said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been." I think the United States should follow this advice, recognize that the price of oil is going to go up. We will live in a carbon-constrained world. Why don't we be one of the early leaders in moving in that direction? If we are, we can develop the technological know-how. If we don't and try to pretend, are we really sure that this is going to happen while other countries move, then we will be playing catch-up. And so here are some estimates. The primary energy business in the United States alone is $1 trillion a year. But worldwide, even limited markets like wind or solar, if you just take those two markets, we're looking at a $3.5 trillion market that, again, we have an opportunity to be a leader. In the Recovery Act, Congress and the President have said that we can spend money to create jobs, that's great, but let's spend money to create jobs in a way that positions the United States in terms of a clean energy economy. And so while we are creating jobs immediately, we also want to rebuild our energy infrastructure and nurture those industries who are going in this direction. Yesterday, the President announced $3.4 billion to invest in the transition to a smart grid. It's just the beginning. The smart grid will give us certain advantages. It will help utilities deliver better service by measuring exactly what the phases are doing, and you can reduce blackouts. It will give homeowners and businesses real-time measurements of their electricity use, and it will give them the ability to manage their electricity use. In particular, it will give them the ability to manage their electricity use so that unnecessary uses of energy in the peak demand times can be shifted off. In so doing, one could save money. How does that work? This is a graph of the generation and distribution assets in the United States. I'll help you read the graph. By the time you get to 100%, for example, down here, and you look at generation, you find that overall, on average, our energy-generating assets, our power plants, are being used only half the time, okay, because they have to be there for peak demand time. So if you look over here, and you can, if you, for example, can shift the load, the last 5% of the load off that peak, you can avoid building new power plants. We're talking about 10% of the power generation in the United States. Doesn't have to really be there if you shift that load. And the estimate is if you can reduce the growth of power plant building, you will be saving hundreds of billions of dollars. That savings goes directly back to the consumer. And this is why energy efficiency and demand shifting is so important. The smart grid will enable us to do this as well. Now, overall in energy efficiency, there are studies that have indicated that you can save a lot of energy and money. One report, McKinsey report, came out this summer, suggested that you can save $680 billion, reduce carbon emissions by over 1 gigaton per year, and actually reduce carbon emissions by 26% by things that save money. And they took as a discount rate 7% net present value. Now, that looks pretty good. The only trouble is there are many economists who don't believe this McKinsey analysis. They say there are simply no $20 bills waiting to be picked up. These economists are of the school of, how many economists does it take to turn a light bulb, screw in a light bulb, change a light bulb? And the answer is none. If it needed changing, the free market would have taken care of it. And so let's now take them seriously. They will say that many of the claims on energy efficiency are not real. They're based on estimates. Where's the hard data? So I actually said, that's a fair question. Let's go back and look at the hard data. So there were over 100 reports given about energy efficiency, the cost benefits, things like that. And I told my folks in the ERE, only look at the ones that don't depend on estimates. Give me the ones that actually depend on you've gone back, you've actually made the investment, we know how much money was made, let's say in the retrofitting of a home, and how much money was actually saved. Now, let me explain this curve to you. The green and the blue curves are sort of models of what engineering can do and various things. Like, for example, in a model home in Chicago, a typical home in Chicago, you put in insulation, you save a bunch of energy. You put in a better heater, you save a bunch of energy. It costs money. And so the x-axis is the cost, The y-axis is energy savings in energy units. Those things, assuming net present value discount of 7% and a very small, modest 0.4% inflation-adjusted cost of energy rise, which probably in the future will be higher, says you are actually making money. And you're making money. You could have taken that money, invested in CDs, and made money. Instead, you put it into energy efficiency, you still make money. It's better investment than a CD. So that's what this exercise is about. Now, what we found of the data that was taken, it's all over the map. These points down here means you're not making money. The points up here in this upper part mean you are making money. So the point here is that these energy efficiency retrofits have to be done correctly. If done correctly, they do save money. And so we are now very focused on making sure that competent energy auditing is done, that the work is done by certified people, and there's post-inspection using modern technologies. And there are market failures to retrofits. It can save money, but there's inconvenience, there's lack of information, there's lack of financing. And so in the Department of Energy, we are looking at trying to break down these market failures. One example is we want to make retrofitting a mass production system. If you want to retrofit your home, you get an energy auditor that tells you what you should do, then you get in 2 or 3 estimates, and they come in, and then do this as a one-off. What if a community, let's say a block organization, says, let's go around and knock on the doors of all our neighbors and say, can we get half our neighbors to sign up to do this retrofitting? Then one truck goes out and does the energy auditing, another truck goes out and one by one blows insulation into the home, and so this mass production, we hope, can dramatically, and if you get more, you get a discount rate, a substantial discount rate, because the cost of business to the contractors is way down. You know, it's not separate trips. So that's what we plan to do. We're going to be piloting these programs. We want to make this a social event. All the houses that do this on this block get a little sticker saying how good they are, and the block gets a little sticker saying how good they are. But this is a way of driving the cost down, improving the information, the inconvenience, and we're also looking at financing ways. We're also trying to stimulate new ideas and fund these new ideas. And so ARPA-E is a program that we've just started. It was designed to ask people to swing from the heels. Instead of making incremental improvements, let's look for really dramatic improvements in energy technology. And for example, let me give you just 2 examples. We had almost 3,700 proposals in our first round. We can only of the 3,700 proposals, we can only fund 37 of them, 1%. There's a lot out there. Certainly the top 10% are worthy of I think, worthy of venture capital, private support. So we're figuring out how to bring that information to the business community at large. There's an old liquid metal battery that could provide grid-scale energy storage. Grid-scale energy storage is megawatt hours and megawatt power. So that a large building with a big top on a solar panels could then store this energy and can run the building. Another way, something we're funding is actually drawn from biological experience. In your cells, you metabolize sugars and you create carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Your body's got to get rid of that carbon dioxide. There's an enzyme in your body that enables your bloodstream to capture the carbon dioxide from your cells, transport it to your lungs, and exhale it. There's no energy penalty in capturing the carbon dioxide and exhaling it. It's all at body temperature. There's a huge energy penalty with today's technologies like amine or cold ammonia in absorbing the carbon dioxide and re-releasing it. So one of the things we're funding is a biomimic, a catalyst that acts like this biological enzyme but is not poisoned in the horrible environment of a flue gas environment. Let me give you an example of the battery. This was actually stimulated by the fact that if you look at the inverse of a battery, something that consumes a tremendous amount of energy, it's the production of aluminum. So why isn't aluminum cell, why can't we make this aluminum cell a battery? So let's consider what we have. We have the aluminum ore that's dissolved in some salt as a liquid. It's all at high temperature, and then you force electricity into this thing, and when you're moving the electricity around, that aluminum dissolved in this environment then plates out as pure aluminum, and then there's byproducts like carbon dioxide that just get vented. Because the carbon dioxide gets vented, you can't use this as a battery. So instead, the people, a professor at MIT said, why don't we design a system so that instead of having this carbon dioxide, in the electrolyte you have another metal that becomes your positive anode, and your aluminum in this case is your negative cathode. And so in this cartoon, you have salts. For example, magnesium and antimony salts dissolved in this fluid. There's a thin sliver of solid magnesium up here and a thin sliver of solid antimony down there. So it's this hot little thing. It's a liquid. You get the separation just because of the density of the fluids, so you can make this room-size swimming pool size, i.e. it scales very nicely. It's cheap, because this is cheap stuff. Now you charge up the battery, and the salts in the liquid actually go to become the positive anode and the negative cathode, pure magnesium, pure antimony, and with discharges, it runs like a battery. And with this idea, they hope that right now, large storage, the best deployed storage is sodium ion technology, roughly $1,000 a kilowatt hour. So their target is $50 a kilowatt hour with megawatt power densities, okay? So if you do this, then all of a sudden, all the renewables like photovoltaics on top of a roof can be stored locally, used locally. And if the price point comes down to that point, then it becomes a real life thing. So this is what we call a home run if it works. Let me just finish by reminding you what's at stake here. This is a picture taken by the astronauts in Apollo 8, the first mission that went to the far side of the moon and orbited it. And what you see here is called Earthrise. It's a very bleak lunar landscape, a very beautiful Earth. And if you notice the landscape in the background, there's nowhere else to go. So Bill Anders, the astronaut who took this picture, said, we came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is we've discovered the Earth. Now, since that time, we've altered the destiny of the Earth because of our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we have to do what we have to do in order to minimize that alteration. So of all the things that we need to do, energy conservation, use the low-carbon technologies we now have, improve energy storage, set the groundwork to discovering new breakthroughs, we also have to act now with fierce urgency. Before the Senate is a bill, we really need a way of capping the carbon in this country and driving down emissions in a way that sends a very long-term signal. By 2020, we're here. By 2030, we're here. By 2040, we're here. By 2050, we're here. If we do not have that long-term signal, you can offer all the carrots you want. Industry will merely take them up and do little pilot things, but not with the serious intent of actually getting into their mainstream activity. But if they had that long-term signal 30 years from today, that this is where we have to be, they would have to drive this in a different way. And that's why it's so important. Now, what's the cost? If we look at the bill that passed the House, the cost is 45 cents or less a day for the average home of 4. There's EPA estimates, there are AIE estimates, they're actually less than this. What's the cost if we don't do something? The cost if we don't do something is that countries like China will race ahead. They're moving. They're not going to wait for us. And if we are playing catch-up now with our U.S. automobile industry. We want to play catch-up in the suite of industries that we will need for this new industrial revolution. And the other cost is we will expose our children, our grandchildren, to essentially unconscionable risk. And that would be on our heads as well. So let me end by saying a quote from Martin Luther King, 1967. He was talking about the Vietnam War, but he's more apt today. And he said, we're now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We're confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Thank you. Questions?
Fantastic presentation. Is it possible to get this off the web later?
Sure.
A comment, it is possible to achieve what was described in the McKinsey study. I can tell you our company, I have a 100,000 square foot industrial building, and we dropped our gas usage by 90% through a renovation. So it is possible, and it was profitable. And then the second thing I want to comment or ask about is the Chinese experience and your communications with the government. I have a small manufacturing company. We export plastic to China. There aren't a whole lot of companies that are doing that these days. My customers tell me that when my product lands in China, they pay a 40% duty on our products that are going in there. So the Chinese government doesn't play nice. You know, they pretend like they say one thing and then they do something else. So my concern on the job side of this thing is that we have to be wise in our dealings. I completely agree with where you're, and I love your presentation. I think your vision is fabulous. We just have to be wise in how we deal with the Chinese.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're putting big tariffs on wind turbines, for example. They're probably going to do the same for photovoltaics. They did sign a memorandum of understanding for a U.S. firm to set up a factory there. They want to produce a 2-gigawatt solar farm in China. And they're viewing the green industries as protected industries because they view this so much as part of the economic prosperity of the future. They want to grow those. So where they are behind, like in wind turbines, they're just protecting their domestic industries. So they're not playing nice. They're not going by the World Trade Organization rules. With regard to the efficiency, you know, when the McKinsey report came out, I said, yeah, that's great. That makes great sense. In personal experience, every time we move, my wife and I move into a new home, we do minor things. You know, foam on the hot water pipes, go to a hardware store, roll out some more insulation, you know, stop the really leaky stuff. Typically, the energy bill goes down by a factor of 2. And so I said, this is drop dead simple. And then, so then went to the EI guys, the economists, and they said, no, it was not going to happen like that. The reason it doesn't happen is because you and I are different than the average. And so, and there are some companies that are doing the right things. Dow, for example, they had a big, huge energy efficiency campaign in their company because it was good business, because they're a carbon company. They take carbon in the form of, let's say, natural gas and convert it to plastics. It's a very energy-intensive industry, and they were saving hundreds of millions of dollars because they're a commodity plastic producer. It's been such a profitable thing for them. They're now selling this as a service to other companies, as long as they're not directly competing with Dow. So, so it is possible. So what we are trying to do in the Department of Energy is to look at why this thing has not taken off. Why are people not capturing all the savings they could capture today? And so that's part of what we're doing. You know, if you're an energy nut, you can do this, but not everybody in the United States is willing to crawl around in their attic. Okay? Yes?
Secretary Chu, my name is Tony Mall, the president of Federated Power, and we're focused on energy efficiency measurement verification in the residential and small commercial sector. And so we understand a lot of the barriers that you're talking about. My question is that we've got the first tranche of the EECBG grants that went out, just received by the states. Ed Pollack and his Building America program doing a lot of great work in the classification of buildings to understand energy efficiency potential. We're talking about the retrofit ramp up. There's a lot of programs that are occurring simultaneously, but there's some tremendous learning that can be taken from each of these things. Where's the clearinghouse, and where can we get this information and this data and lessons learned that we can?
We're the clearinghouse, and we've realized, for example, in our weatherization programs, ECBG, we're giving out lots of money. Before we weren't taking back in the data. It's very important to take back in the data. It's also very important to have inspections of the work. And with today's modern technology, with infrared viewers, you can do this. So you don't have to tear up the wall to see that the insulation has been blown in. Without that technology, I fear that there would be unscrupulous contractors out there that would blow it in some of the times and not other times, or maybe they don't put in as much as they should. So I think I only say this because it happened to me twice. one time at Stanford, we bought an old house. It was a duplex built in 1908. So in the attic, there were boards on the floor. So and there was actually ball and wire wiring, and so I couldn't tear up the boards and put it down fiberglass. But I turned it was safe to blow in a type of insulation. So I looked around, got a contractor to do it. When the work started, I rode my bike home at the houses on Stanford campus, and I looked at what they were doing and found out of the spec I wrote was R32. It's that much insulation because the boards were that thick. They were blowing this much. So I helped the young person who was blowing in meet spec. Halfway through, the contractor called up and started yelling at this poor kid, and he said, talk to me. So he starts yelling at me. He says, you're using up all my insulation. He's already 2 jobs behind schedule. And said, sorry, we have a spec and a contract here. And then, a couple more phone calls. He was going to sue me, so and so and so and so. I said, fine, sue me. We have a contract. And so in the house I bought in Chevy Chase, I started crawling around my attic and lifted up one of the boards and found that one of the things was blown in, the other was not. So I'm in the process of getting one of those infrared viewers to see what I don't want to tear up all the boards in my house. So this does happen. And I think this is why sometimes the energy efficiency dollars one spends, you don't see the return. Okay. But once you know that it's going to be inspected, it tends to drive a different type of behavior. Yes?
Mike Lawrence with Johns Manville. We make some of that insulation, hopefully, that you're using. But I applaud the retrofit initiatives, and it actually creates jobs to do that for people who want to crawl around in attics, and that's great for those of us who don't. But I'm asking more about the new construction. It's so much cheaper to do it right the first time. And have you looked hard?
Oh, yeah, very much so. In fact,
across the country that you could drive that?
yes. Well, federally, we can't really. It's standards, number one. Standards are mostly local, but we are trying to figure out how we can encourage better behavior that way. We are building up tools. The precursor would be a tool, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, that to make a reasonably good estimate of what the performance of a new home would be. Also a reasonably good estimate of what the performance of an existing home would be. So you can create, a refrigerator label type style of this is the range of homes you could buy, and this new home might be here in terms of higher energy efficiency up here. We can also, for the turnaround of used homes, ask for the year's electricity and gas bill. Again, it's prudent. Now that shouldn't be a regulation, because the regulations require many, many years probably of litigation. But you can ask the banks to ask for that information, because it's prudent. It goes to the affordability of your mortgage. If you have $5,000 a year energy bill, you have less money to pay the mortgage. Transaction cost, virtually nil. It motivates the current homeowner to make energy improvements that up the resale value of the home. It has a more informed buyer, and it actually drives new home construction in the right direction, because they will look very good compared to the old homes. So taxpayer dollars, virtually nothing, driving right behavior. And it's going to save money in the end. So we're looking very hard at starting programs like these. Yes?
Hi, my name is Lisa Daniels. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Windustry, a nonprofit based in Minnesota. We work to promote locally owned wind energy projects like community wind. And I'm wondering if there's any effort within, for instance, within Department of Energy, to follow how some of these projects have to get together and have to come together, and how maybe to use some, in order to use some of the federal mechanisms, for instance, any of the loan mechanisms from the Department of Energy or Department of Ag require a NEPA process first. but that leaves out, that totally leaves out a lot of the smaller distributed projects that might be locally owned, because it takes such a deep pocket to do a NEPA process. But one idea as an idea to address some of that is to make make the federal nexus at the obligation of the funds rather than at the advance of the funds, and that way the process can be somewhat financed by the federal nexus right there.
I'm not sure I'm following you, but let me say first, there are a lot of cooperative things, not only in wind but also in biofuels, things like that, around the country that we're generally very supportive of, because this is a way of the local landowners creating more wealth for themselves, and it's a way of creating wealth in rural America that we are very positive about. We can't circumvent the NEPA things. There are things we can do to make it go faster, but maybe we can talk offline about, we also are trying to streamline our loan process. We are not good at making small loans. We are getting better at making big loans, but it still has a ways to go. But and we are looking at other partners. So until we get our process that could deal with loans on the scale of a couple $1 million or less, which we can't deal with now, but I'm on this problem, believe me. We have to do, but maybe we can talk offline about exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Yes.
Craig Bramsher from Bramo. We produce an electric vehicle that's available today through Best Buys, and to celebrate that, we actually had 2 riders leave from Detroit a couple weeks ago and make their way to DC. These vehicles are less than 0.7 cents a mile to operate, and yet we don't necessarily qualify in the DOE programs because we're 2 wheels. That's question one. The other one is, in terms of batteries, do you see programs to help consumers buy electric vehicles that are just too expensive because of the batteries?
Yeah, we huge amount of money. I think it's a $2.4 billion battery program, advanced battery manufacturing. In addition to that, we are investing a lot in research that would be, that RPE thing is a stationary battery, but we're investing a lot in research to develop batteries for mobile platforms like cars. There are a number of pretty exciting things in companies being developed that hopefully can increase the energy density by a factor of 3. In fact, another RPE program we are funding that hopefully will increase the energy density by 5 times, I think it was. I'm trying to remember. But 3 to 5 in energy density needs a much lower cost. I mean, the Chevy Volt battery, I've been told, is going to be only drained halfway down, because if you do it further than that, the battery won't last that long. But even halfway down, it won't last the lifetime of the car. And the cost is very, very high. A sizable fraction of the cost of the car, a sizable fraction of the weight of the car. So we need the energy density up and we need the cost down. Before I see really wide scale, like 50% market penetration, the battery has to be improved. The good news is there are a bunch of good ideas out there that are, maybe just years away. Yes.
Parker, Deutsche Asset Management. Nice to see you again. We published a report yesterday on country competitiveness, looking at regulatory environments. I think about 110 countries we rated around the world. The U.S. is not in the top group. What we spoke about was needing TLC, which is transparency, longevity, and certainty in the regulatory environment, in order to spark investor interest, which is really what our point of view is. We've spoken about this several weeks ago, and clearly without the private sector coming in, a lot of the programs that are being developed in terms of putting venture capital money out and finding breakthrough technologies are not going to get to scale without private investor capital being able to take that to the next level. I wonder if you can comment on your views about TLC with respect to the U.S. regulatory environment, which will bring the capital in to really scale these projects up.
Okay, if the folks in the back can turn on their display again. Thank you. These are the way we do incentives, production tax credits. They're on 1 year, then they're off. They're on 1 year, then they're off. And when you do things like that, the investor community, the business community doesn't really know whether they're really going to continue. So this is why the president has said, for example, in certain research R&D tax credits, that they want it for at least 10 years. Really, you want it forever. But that's why they're going this direction. This is another example of something. It might be coincidence with some other cycle we know about. But anyway, I think this is a very important part of what we need to do. This is why a comprehensive energy and climate bill is so important, to stabilize things, to send long-term signals. With the long-term signals, the business community will respond to those long-term signals, okay? But they have to be long-term and stable. And with the proper long-term signals, I think the innovation machine, the R&D and innovation machine in the United States is superior to anything else in the world. So, yes, we don't have to simply convince a few engineers that run the government to do this thing and then they go in that direction. But we have a different system. But by the same token, our system also allows lots of independent things to flower and bubble up. Yes.
Electric vehicles. To your point, I mean, I think we've been very out front in this market trying to get the commercial, the Coca-Colas, and the large corporates to move toward all electric vehicles for their delivery. And applying economics at the street level, it makes a tremendous amount of sense, plus the emission benefits again. But it truly is, with the battery cost, it's not cost effective today to buy these vehicles. And again, for that predictability, we definitely see their commitment to the long-term goal. But having predictable incentives today over the next few years to offset that cost of batteries is critical to the adoption. And because it's not just about manufacturing scale, it's adoption within their systems, how to deploy these vehicles, how to manage them, how to maintain them. So for us, it is pretty critical to give them that clarity and predictability. Is there some amount of dependency they can count on for the amount of time that's going to require for these batteries to come online so they can start adopting today, so they can be ready for adoption?
Well, you know, $2.4 billion is not cheese. It's so this is for advanced battery manufacturing, and hopefully it won't. They don't build things that will be obsolete in 5 years, because I do think that, there's either evolutionary or revolutionary improvement in batteries, and so the plants will certainly be fine for the evolutionary stuff, but hopefully also for the more revolutionary things that I see coming on board. That we're just beginning to scratch the surface of using nanotechnology in batteries. It's happening. A123, other companies are doing this, but a lot of really good ideas out there to really, I used to be a scientific consultant before I took this job of a battery company, a startup where after 1,500 deep discharges, no sign of wear.
But again, I think you're absolutely not tracking. You're making the investment. So 3 years from today, you're going to have capacity, you're going to have better costs, things are coming in line, but people aren't going to be ready to adopt because they haven't learned how to. So I'm looking at the next 3 years. I think there's a real opportunity for major adoption if there's some offset to help them adopt these vehicles quicker, be ready when that actually
Well, that's a difficult question, because if we can put in tens of billions of dollars to help adopt now, technology where we know the batteries are only going to last 5 years or 3 years. I have qualms about that. Whereas $1 billion into research that can give us in 5 years' time, a battery will last 15 years and it be half or a third the weight and half a third the cost. That's much more exciting because there it will just explode. And so I have mixed thoughts on that. Yes.
In Toledo, Ohio. We are a solar manufacturing company, and we're trying to ramp up our manufacturing production operation in Toledo. And we applied the DOE loan guarantee program, and that we understand is making progress. But we come to an issue that I understand we are asked to to commit to pay for $1 million or $1.5 million to do the evaluation, that we have to bear the cost. I just wondering whether DOE could somehow from another pocket pay for that cost.
The answer is no. But let me just say that this is part of the loan guarantee program that I'm not happy with. I've actually got 2 examples of loan applications in my office on a bookshelf. They're that thick. Okay. I'm not sure it costs $1 million, but let's not squabble. Certainly $250,000 is a minimum in order to create a, yeah.
$250,000, and we're asking.
I know, and so I'm just saying you have my sympathy. I don't think we really need an application that thick. It creates work for us as well as for you. It creates time and money for us as well as for you. And so we are trying to do this. So far, I mean, I became acutely aware of this in my 2nd week as secretary. And we are trying to do a better job of it. There's a little bit of leeriness with the veterans in the Department of Energy because in the go-go late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of investments made where loans that the companies went bankrupt. And so we have a dual role. We have to protect the taxpayers' interests. We can't be giving out loans and the large fraction of those loans go bust. And yet we still realize that a lot of the money is out, the private sector money is still sitting on the sidelines. And so we need to get it better. But I don't think it requires that much in order to decide to do proper due diligence. I think it requires, instead of 500 or 600 pages, 60. But so I'm working on it, but you know, if they have me going to things like this, and what I'd really rather do is be back there in the Forrestal building and leaning and saying, why do we need this, why do we need that? Actually, I get my biggest joy of saying, we don't need this stuff. Yes, back there?
Hi, Dr. Chu, Terry Callahan with the Alliance to Save Energy. It's good to see you again. Our organization believes it's very important for the government to lead by example, and so we're delighted with the new executive order. You didn't, in your talk about what the government is actually doing. I know there have been a few audits of operations that probably have been a bit embarrassing about energy use in the federal government. Can you talk a bit about what the plans are of the administration, and in particular what the role of the Department of Energy is going to be in making sure that you get your workhouse in order?
Well, yes, I agree with you. It's been a bit embarrassing. I'll go even a little further. I mean, when I was director of LB&L, I actually thought the change in behavior was the hardest thing to change and the cheapest thing to do. Rather than install, which they were doing, automatic on-off, so the lights turn off and things like that, I couldn't get, although, you know, in another few months I would have done it, to get all the computers to go, the personal computers to go into sleep mode. Sleep mode is different than hibernate or turning off. When you turn off a computer using today's operating systems, they sometimes crash, or it takes several minutes to turn them off and on. Going in sleep mode, it actually puts the immediate stuff into RAM and powers down the chip to a very, very low energy consumption, maybe a few percent of what it would be doing just standing idle. So we're now talking about the difference between 100 to 200 watts and a few watts. And it can be brought up instantly, a second or two. You can do many things like that, but let me tell you the worst thing. People leave stuff on for no reason. And sometimes they leave stuff on for years. I was touring in LB&L, you know, space is always a crunch, and so it's always hard to get people to give up space. If you ask the division director, do you have any space for common good? The answer is no, we're just full up, we need more space. So the only way to do that is to take the division director and me and go walk their space, go open up every door. And so one time I opened up the door of this lab. It was old, dusty. This dust over me. It's been there for a while. Stuff was on. I said, what did you use this room for? Oh, this was an historic room. It was used to determine. There's a thin clay layer in the geological history. In the thin clay layer, there's an anomalous amount of an element called iridium. And Alvarez, father and son, Louis Alvarez, Walter Alvarez, discovered through neutron activation that this iridium had the composition of meteorites, a very high composition of this very unusual element. And below this thin clay layer is a very rich fossil history, and above the clay layer, a very different fossil history. And this is in many parts of the world. And the identification of the iridium, and paleontologists, geochemists didn't really know what this is about until they found out that that was a smoking gun signature for a very large meteorite hitting the Earth. And then years later, they found the remains of that meteorite actually using changes in the acceleration due to gravity of oil exploration. So what killed the last of the dinosaurs was not constipation, as suggested by some people. It was probably a large comet meteorite that hit the Earth, put up a huge plume, kind of like a winter for a couple of years, about 60% of all plant and animal life, mass extinction around the world. And that room was used actually for doing some of the things that did this. Okay, that was 15 years ago. The equipment was still on. That was really sad, and so I think that personal behavior, when you're done with the hood, close the hood. Turns out we can't do it automatically because it's a violation of some, health and safety rule. If you leave a hood on, one hood in a chemistry room, it has the energy of about 4 homes. That's a time average. A home is about 10 kilowatt energy use. One hood, because it's sucking in air, and in the winter it's sucking in cold air, and in summer it's sucking in hot air. And so one lousy hood. And so what you have to do is you have to, get behavior to close it so there's only about that much when you're not using it. Okay. Yes.
I'm Mark Boslow. I'm a worker bee scientist from Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque. And I think you made a very good case from the climate perspective, but your focus was on the best estimate for climate change, the kind of 50% probability level. I'm convening a session at the upcoming American Geophysical Union conference. My session is called Uncertainty Quantification and its Application to Climate Change. I've got a couple of abstracts in, one from MIT, one from Harvard, both independently estimating the 2% probability levels of one climate change this century and one climate sensitivity, which amount to about the same thing. And they're estimating as much as 8 degrees C increase with a 2% probability. Now in defense and in national security, we worry about worst cases. We prepare for the worst, we hope for the best. But an 8-degree climate change is extreme, and in fact, after the Alvarezes published their paper in 1980, people were speculating, well, what actually killed the dinosaurs? And it was climate change. And people speculated and estimated that a 10-degree change in temperature would be an extinction event. So there is a significant probability that there will be a very sudden change in the fossil record coming up very shortly.
So here's the IPCC. This is the A1FI one. This is an MIT one, a more recent one. The IPCC one has a long tail. Actually, I claim that once you're in this region, 5 or 6 degrees, that's cataclysmic already. Okay, because that's the difference between us and the ice ages. And once you're at 5 or 6 degrees, you don't have to go to 8 degrees. You're looking at 3% species extinction.
How can we as scientists communicate this without being accused of being alarmists?
Well, it is alarming. Sorry.
Brett Aker, founder of Wave Power Technologies. We make fast charging for electric vehicles. Thomas Friedman and others have suggested the best way to get electric vehicles on the road is to tax the bejeebies out of gasoline. Yeah. It's political suicide. Can you do one thing for us? Tell Obama when he gets reelected and becomes a lame duck tax the Jesus out of that. It will work, and the technology will be ready.
Well, it's not only the president, it's Congress. And so, unfortunately, it violates so deeply rule number 2 in politics. So get reelected. Yeah. So I think you know what's going to have to come from? It's going to have to come from a larger fraction of the American public that says this is what we need to do. If you're really serious about oil dependency, it's going to have to come from the people. Okay, you in all fairness, you know, the president might be willing to do this, but Congress won't go along with it. And so in all fairness, what you need to do is you have to get an increasing number of members of the American public to say this is really important. In the meantime, you do the other things. You improve the mileage standards in an accelerated manner, because this is actually good for American industry, because this is the future. And so for decades, they were saying, well, we're not sure, but so other countries, Europe, Asia, start to pass us by, and then all of a sudden, we're where we are today. So you do the things like regulatory things. You try to convince people it's the right thing to do. You do a number of things, you know, make it, you know, convince the young people actually seem to learn a little faster than their parents. The young people convince their parents to stop smoking, in large part. The young people have a really good plea. They can look, Mommy and Daddy, don't you care about me? You're going to leave me in what world? And do you really need to go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds? Because that's the cost. Now, if they're young men at the age of 18, 19, they also have to say, I don't need to go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. And lighter weight vehicles, all these things. So there are ways to do this, and you try to all those things. In the meantime, you hope that the American public says more and more, it's okay. I guess you said one last question already. Okay, so I'll be, unlike normal times, I'll listen. All right, thank you all.
We're going to transition directly into the panel discussion here. So give us 1 minute to get set up, and then we're going to go ahead and start it.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Zoy, and I'm Assistant Secretary of Energy for all the really fun stuff at the Department, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you to Secretary Chu for a fantastic session. What we're going to do now is see some real evidence, hear from some business folks that are creating jobs, making good investments here in the United States, doing great stuff. What the Secretary talked about is we're at the beginning of the next industrial revolution. And the next industrial revolution in this country is going to be about clean energy. And for this sort of transformation to happen, we need policy. And I was recently, about a few weeks ago, I was in Montana. And I was having a visit to one of a big weatherization program kickoff. And I was meeting with the editorial board of the Billings newspaper. And I said, look, you know, we need this transformation to happen. She's like, yeah. And I said, this is one of those places where there's not necessarily widespread agreement that this transformation needs to happen, that we need this policy. She said, yeah, you're right. I said, what will it take for us to get the support across Montana for this clean energy transformation, for the policies that are necessary for this clean energy transformation? And she said, you know, more wind turbines, more evidence, more tangible evidence that this is creating jobs in places like Montana. And it kind of we had a conversation for a while, and it got to the point where it was basically back to that old adage of seeing is believing. And she told me about her father-in-law, who was a very, very kind of a conservative voter who was kind of skeptical, but he's also a farmer. And he is now making more money on his land, leasing it for wind turbines, than he was out of farming. And he said, now he's a believer. And so what we need to do is create more seeing is believing. And that's one of the things that we hope we're able to achieve in the speed and scale that's happening through the Recovery Act. So I just wanted to paint a picture for you of what's happening so far. Yesterday, as the Secretary mentioned, the President announced $3.4 billion in smart grid investments. And you can see on this map here that it's got wide coverage across America. So we're hoping that we're creating more seeing is believing. Here's the distribution of our Solar Recovery Act awards, again, widespread across this country. Here's where our Wind Energy Recovery Act awards, again, across various places around the country, the ones that have been announced so far. Here's our Clean Cities Recovery Act award distribution across this country. As the Secretary mentioned, our Battery and Electric Drive Manufacturing Awards, again, $2.4 billion getting invested. And this is just representing the direct federal investment. Of course, they'll be leveraging as these companies grow and build more facilities across the nation. Our Transportation Electrification Recovery Act award. Here's the 1603, the grants in lieu of tax credits for renewable energy projects, $1 billion of funding that has gotten broad geographic distribution across this country. And our fuel cell awards. And each of those stars on this map is now representing the summation of where we've gotten to so far in our investments. So this is fantastic. This is heartening. And it's a great start. But then I ask a question, is this data, is this geographic distribution enough to persuade policymakers here in Washington and across the country that clean energy is here, it's ready, it's big, it's ramping up, it's creating jobs? And while my background has been a mixture between business and government for most of my career, I spent the last 2 years before coming into the administration running the Alliance for Climate Protection, which is an advocacy organization whose mission is to persuade people of the urgency and the solvability of the climate crisis. And what I learned in being an advocate is that it's not just data. It's about capturing hearts and minds. It's about telling the stories of the real people that are part of these stars on this map. And so what we've done, and we just launched it this week, is we've created a website called Energy Empowers. And there we go. And here's how it looks. What we're doing is creating and talking about the success stories that are embedded in each of those stars on that map. So here's our front page, and it's got Ben, a fellow from Ohio, who's a single dad who's now actually earning a living. He was an HVAC contractor, got laid off, and he is now earning a living, providing for his family as a weatherization contractor. And there's a little short video that's a great story about he and his family. And it literally, when I heard the story about what he'd gone through, it brought tears to my eyes. These are the stories that people remember and they talk about. And our elected officials remember those stories and they talk about them. There's Travis, who's doing something in Florida. There's Todd in Iowa. What we want is for you to help us, if you can, build this database of these human success stories of the real jobs that are getting created out of the Recovery Act. And we talk a lot about green jobs, but green jobs are just good jobs. Green jobs are the jobs, these jobs are the jobs of the next industrial revolution. So today, we're going to hear from 4 business leaders who are creating those good jobs, who are leading this industrial revolution here. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their businesses, some of the challenges and some of the triumphs. First, we'll start off with, and we're going to touch different pieces of the clean energy sector. The first person we'll hear from is Mark Morelli, who's the CEO of Energy Conversion Devices, also known as Unisolar, based in Michigan. Next, we'll go to Joe Rigby, who's chairman of the board, president, and CEO of Pepco, the utility here in Washington. He's going to talk a little bit about smart grid. We'll then go to Chuck Swoboda, who's the CEO and chairman of Cree, and he will talk to us about some really interesting and revolutionary lighting innovation that's happening, and he's based in North Carolina. And then we'll round it out with Rick Fulop, who's the co-founder of A123 Systems, who's doing advanced battery work. And we know that these folks are just a small subset of the revolutionary work that's taking place and that's represented here in this audience. We'll then, after we hear briefly from each of those guys, we'll then have a discussion amongst all of us about what we can do together to make sure that it is well understood amongst decision makers that this is happening, it's ready for prime time, but we need a policy framework that will allow that transformation to happen quickly in this country. So with that, let me turn it over to Mark. Would you like to, you can speak from either the table or up here, whatever is easier for you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Assistant Secretary Zoe and Secretary Chu, for being here. Part of this new revolution this new industrial revolution based on clean energy. We do a unisolar products, which are essentially a thin film, lightweight laminate that generates electricity from sunlight, and it goes very easily on rooftops. So this is about distributed power generation. It's about low impact to a roof. But let me first of all talk about Greenville, Michigan. A couple years ago, there was a large factory in Greenville. Greenville has a population of about 8,000 folks. And this factory employed 3,000 people in this small city in the Midwest. That factory closed. This small town was in significant distress. We now have 2 factories in Greenville, Michigan. These are unisolar factories. We have a total of 5 factories in Michigan today. What we've done is we have reinvigorated these towns through employing folks. We've had to retrain them. A lot of these folks come from the automotive industry. We've partnered with local universities to give them the right skills for these clean energy jobs. These are good jobs. These are jobs that you can raise a family on. These are high-tech jobs, and these are very well sought after. In fact, we screen the folks that come in because there's so many applicants for these programs, and we take the best and the brightest, and they really help us produce high-quality products, and we get excellent productivity out of our workforce. It's interesting. There's a story that one gentleman told me on his way home. He doesn't want to wear his unisolar shirt from Greenville, Michigan, because he gets stopped often and he's late for dinner on his way home because people want to thank him for saving the town. So it's a great story, but we're just starting the journey. We've got a long way to go. In fact, this recession is in fact hurting many industries, including our industry as well. I just want to talk with you about the benefits of solar. It's just part of a major portfolio that is needed for clean, renewable energy. But if you think about distributed power generation, every time I fly into any airport and I look out the window and I look at all these rooftops, there's nothing happening on those rooftops. We can generate electricity. We're working with new technologies. We produce 9 miles of solar laminates every day. And we're on the road to ramping to what we call a levelized cost of energy or grid parity, and we're continuing to advance that technology. If we could generate this electricity on these rooftops at the point of use, you don't further burden the transmission grid. You don't have to lay additional transmission grid. You're not using space that could otherwise be used, and obviously you're generating electricity at the peak of the day when the costs tend to be the highest as well. It's interesting to note that 80% of our products that we manufacture in the United States today are shipped over to Europe. They go to France, they go to Italy, they go to Spain, they go to Germany. These countries have embraced forward-looking programs where they have created incentives that are stable, that investors are willing to put money behind, and it's created an entire infrastructure, not only of manufacturing, marketing, and sales and installation, but also a lot of job growth that's gone along with this right across the value chain of activities. It's very interesting because this next new industrial revolution, it's so exciting because this is now beginning to happen in the United States. In fact, the programs that are being done here through the DOE loan guarantee program, the tax incentives, a lot of the activities that are being pushed forward by the government, the DOE, we want to thank the DOE. It must be a tremendous task to be able to go through and initiate all of these new programs that are all coming out at once. At the same time, we need to open that spigot because the funds need to flow faster. We need to create the market opportunity, and not just through manufacturing incentives, but right through the value chain for renewables. And this is the kind of incentives and stability that's needed, so we certainly applaud all of the conversation that's been happening today. It's also very important for us to recognize that when you think about the amount of carbon and the cost of carbon, that it's clearly not an equalized playing field. We are on a new industrial revolution that really requires us to think and to invest differently. We've got the right technologies. We're improving those technologies, but we need the stability and the amount of incentives and the economic environment to continue on this path and on this journey to grid parity. So I'd like to thank the Obama administration for all the help and assistance in partnering, and we look forward to further our partnership in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Joe Rigby from PEPCO.
Thank you, Kathy. It's really an honor to be here. I'm very proud to lead the local utility here that has served this city for over 100 years. I want to begin, similar to what Mark said, to thank the President and also Secretary Chu for your vision and your leadership that's really led to providing these grants. And if you hear nothing else, I want to, on behalf of our customers, I want to say thank you. I had a great opening line. It's one that I've used in other settings. It goes something like the fact that at PEPCO, we frequently talk about if Thomas Edison was magically transported back here and looked at the distribution system, he would say that nothing much has changed. But for those of you who were here for Director Browner's comments this morning, you heard that President Obama uses that line. So I respectfully cede use of that line going forward. I've been around for 30 years and started my career at Atlantic City Electric. I'm a lifer, I'm a vet. And what's most exciting to me on a personal level is that I'm going to experience over the last phase of my career the actual transformation of our delivery system. This is real. We're going to transform how we're going to deliver energy. We're going to help our customers save money. We're going to address the key environmental issues, and we're going to create jobs as we go through it. This is particularly exciting to us. We've embarked on a journey about 4 or 5 years ago that was pretty much driven from some of the similar comments that Secretary Chu made, that our view of the future is one where energy costs are going to go up, our customers are going to struggle. We need to deal with some key domestic and international issues, and we need to wrestle down the environmental issues that face our society. And we're a company that has a very, very small, relatively small generation fleet. I mean, we're not big into generation. We have about 4,500 megawatts of about, it's primarily natural gas fired, so it's on a relative level, it's a small carbon footprint. What our company is all about is wires and poles and how we deliver that energy to our customers. We began looking at not just really at the meter, but all the way back to our system controls of how we needed to integrate, update our business system such that we would be able to deliver timely information that would help our customers better manage their energy usage, frankly, use less of our product, which is somewhat counterintuitive when you think about it. But it's the right thing to do, and more often than not, when you're doing the right thing, you typically will have, in fact, a good business outcome. About 2 years ago, we identified just a shade under $500 million of spending across our service territory. We operate in 4 states, including the District of Columbia. So yesterday's announcement that we would be the recipients of $168 million has a huge impact for us because it's costs that our customers would otherwise have to pay for. So yesterday was a big win for our customers. We're ready to deploy. Over the last 12 months, we've made our key technological decisions. We've already identified the technology that's going to reside within the meter. We've picked our meter manufacturers. We've done just about all of the backhaul system work that we need to do to begin to deploy this, and we've also retained a meter deployment vendor, so we're ready to roll. And we're actually going to begin deployment of our smart grid in the state of Delaware, and we're ready to now accelerate our plans here in the District of Columbia and also in Maryland, so we are, in fact, in our views, shovel ready. We anticipate that we're going to create and be able to maintain hundreds of jobs. We're going to be installing 1.4 million meters across homes and businesses in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Delaware. We eventually plan to do this in the state of New Jersey. One of the reasons why we haven't is because in our dialogue with the regulators there, they haven't seen that smart meters are integral to the smart grid yet. So, and I want to come back and talk about that as one of the challenges. So we're going to be employing technicians that will complete the deployment. We'll be doing about 3,000 meters a day as we move methodically throughout our service territory. But there's also going to be technicians to install and maintain the field communication devices, engineers to design systems, program managers to oversee the work, and energy advisors, not call center reps, energy advisors to communicate with our customers so that they understand the information and they're going to be able to take advantage of the tools to better manage their energy usage. The technology really needs to also work with a variety of programs, whether it's demand response, energy efficiency program, direct load control, and also the vital information that we'll be able to provide to our customers in a real-time mode in terms of usage and price, such that we're going to be able to achieve our overarching goals. We believe that we can provide over $1 billion of savings over the next 15 years, along with the reduction of about 1,300 megawatts on an annual basis of peak energy demand. One of the things that I mentioned is the criticality of working with our local regulators, and it was a topic that came up earlier. I think Director Browner commented that not everybody's in the same place, and as the company that interacts at the local level, working with key stakeholders like our regulator is critically important because they stand in a very, very difficult place. They basically make decisions around rates that lead to bills that customers have to pay. So it's very, very important for us to work directly with them and to be able to show tangible benefits in the near term such that these are, in fact, investments that help our customers. We serve 1.9 million customers. Not all of them are as technically savvy as the people I'm sitting up here with. Some of them are like my dad. He's 90 years old. He really, quite frankly, doesn't care about technology. We have residential customers, we have commercial customers, we have governmental customers, we have industrial customers. We run the whole gamut. We have early adopters, we have people who frankly couldn't care less, they just want to be able to pay their bill. We have poor and we have rich customers. This is going to work only to the extent that customers win. So one of the great challenges I think we face is not just on the technical end. It's on our ability to educate our customers, to meet them where they are, to help them understand that these tools are in fact going to help them in their everyday lives. And so really what success in my mind is not just going to be defined by how technically competent this all is. It's whether or not we leave anybody behind. And I think that's quite an ambitious thing. It's going to take us a couple years. People think about the smart grid. It's not just slapping a meter on someone's house. I think it's going to take some time, but I really do envision in the next 3 or 4 years that we are in fact going to live and experience that transformation. So for me personally, it's incredibly exciting. And again, I'm very appreciative of the support from the administration, and I'm pleased to be here, and that wraps up my comment.
Thank you, Joe. Chuck from Cree.
Thanks. I really appreciate the chance to be here. You know, the Cree story started in 1987 with 5 guys at NC State University who had a government R&D contract to invent some new semiconductor materials. The only thing they didn't have was a market, and actually they didn't have a product, but they had an idea. So they decided to form a company that's really based around the idea that they were going to innovate and solve problems that needed to be solved, and that's what drives business. And so that really was the foundation of where Cree started 22 years ago. Today, we are focused our entire company around leading what we call an LED lighting revolution. And we call it a revolution because we think it's very disruptive. I spoke at a conference with Thomas Friedman, and he said, green technology is not a revolution because nobody gets hurt. And I maybe wisely or unwisely followed him up and said, well, guess what? LED lighting is a revolution because someone's going to get hurt. And I said, because we're going to hurt the light bulb companies because they're in the business of convincing us to buy an inferior product that wastes energy that's a bad business decision. And so I think we have to change people's thinking about that, and that's really the mission of our company. And what it really gets down to is energy efficiency. And I think all the clean technologies we talk about are very important, but obviously I'm very passionate about energy efficiency. The cleanest energy we can have and the cheapest is the energy we do not use. And I think all the alternative technologies are very important, but the stuff we can do right now in energy efficiency, there's no reason we shouldn't be doing it today. And I know many of you I don't need to convince, but you'd be surprised how many people you talk to every day that if they heard you say that, they might believe that a little bit more. It is probably one of the least well understood. I talk to many people who understand the idea of solar and wind much better than energy efficiency, and the one's right in front of them. 22% of the electricity in the United States is lighting. If we deploy LED lighting widespread around the country, we can cut that by over a third. That's almost 10% of the entire electricity consumption in the United States that's using technology that's already invented. It just has to be used. Now, the argument is always that it costs more, and it does. It costs more up front. But the neat part about it is it pays for itself. And I don't mean it pays for itself in 20 years. We have real customers today installing it telling us their payback is 1 to 2 years. Most businesses, if they're given a capital choice and can get that kind of payback, and then they keep that benefit going forward, will make those choices. But it's amazing. We're facing a battle where they almost never even consider the new technology. And so, while we're a technology company, we spend most of our time trying to change people's perception of what we can do. And that comes down to education, awareness, and really, when it comes to policy, and incentive to change. What's interesting is we've actually seen that the stimulus programs had a side benefit that no one expected. By starting the conversation about energy efficiency, we've seen increased demand for things like LED lighting, not because of direct stimulus dollars, because we got a conversation started. And as that education and awareness curve comes towards us, we can go after that market. A couple of examples. At Cree, we decided to do it ourselves, so we are an LED lighting company that was using fluorescents. So we started changing our company, done 10%, saving 54% of the electricity from lighting. We estimate that when we're done, we'll save about 2 billion kilowatt hours per year by just changing out our own lights. Another example is the city of Los Angeles did a test for LED lighting, has announced they'll convert 140,000 streetlights because it saves 40% of the electricity from the traditional ones. And they get a huge maintenance benefit. So it's the nice part about LED lighting, it's real and it's starting to happen, so it's starting to lead to things like jobs. But before I get into that, I want to give you one great example. I hear all the time that we can't afford to do this. And my answer is always, we can't afford not to. And they say, but that's just your opinion because you're an LED lighting company. I'd say, I worked for the automotive industry in the 1980s. And there was plenty of fuel efficiency standards that were proposed in the 1980s. And we didn't do it because every car company that knew what they was trying to convince you to buy a car said, don't do it. It'll raise prices and it'll hurt the American automotive industry. Well, if we could have heard it any more than the government owning it, I don't know that we could have done much worse. So, and that's not to say that the bailout was or was not appropriate. My point is, that's what happens when you resist taking on the challenges to innovate. It's a global market, and we're in competition from everyone around the world. And the fact that we can look at that consumer and they say, my car's going to cost more, the answer is, they may not understand the choice they have to make in the future. So with that, as we talk about the policy debate, I think the other thing we have to realize is there are people who don't want to do this, and some of them we don't always think about. So despite some of the progressive things that Joe talked about from utilities, which are very exciting, there's also traditional utilities that are in the business of building power plants and selling electricity. And in most states, we ask them to drive energy efficiency. I have to tell you, if you're the CEO of a company that's supposed to sell energy, it's pretty hard to get paid to not sell energy. And so we have to realize we've got to get past this. And I'm not saying we need to hurt those companies' businesses, don't have to be managed, and we have to work with them. But we have to push that debate forward, because if we don't, we're going to have a disadvantage. Our biggest market today at Cree is China. They're the largest user of LED lighting in the world, and they're not doing it because they're trying to be green. They're doing it because it's good business. If we don't do things to fundamentally change how we use energy, we're not going to have a labor cost problem with China. We're going to have an energy cost problem. It will be less competitive to do business in this country because our fundamental infrastructure cannot compete. It's amazing to go to China and see the number of LED lighting installations, not because it's green, because they think it's good business and it is a competitive advantage for their country. Now the good news is that also creates a large market, and so Cree's expanded in China. It's actually our biggest market and our fastest growing. At the same time, with the momentum that we've seen in the US, we also now see a market growing here. So we announced a few weeks ago that Cree will be adding 600 jobs in North Carolina in the next few years to expand production of LED and LED lighting to service the market. And I think that's the key point. The jobs follow the market. If we want to have green jobs, we want to have clean economy jobs, we have to participate in that economy. And I think that's a key part of some of the policy decisions that we're looking for is in LED lighting, we don't necessarily need cost offsets. What we need is policy to move the behaviors to a different place. So with that, I guess what I'd really ask is that our request is that all of us get committed to leading by example. Someone always says, what's the first step of being a leader? And the answer is, you have to lead. And if that sounds funny or it sounds rhetorical, but it's be surprising if you walk out of this room, look how many things you do that aren't leadership. We can't wait for someone to take action. We have to go take the action, and it will happen. I'll make one more Edison reference since everyone else has. The incandescent light bulb that is still very prevalent was invented in 1879. And so we like to say that that time has come, and it's a great invention. It mostly belongs in the museums here in Washington. However, the advertisement that Thomas Edison put together for the first electric light was, you need to use electric light because gas light is so energy inefficient. It's mostly heat and a little bit of light. Well, guess what? The light bulb is about the same thing. It's about 5 to 7% light, and the rest is heat. So I think it's time we go do that again. And with that, I'll pass along the mic.
Okay, so Rick is going to use a couple of slides, and again, let's just, what we're going to do is have about 5 more minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. So Rick, A123.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you, Secretary Choi and Secretary Chu, for inviting our company to this panel and all the support from the Department of Energy since the foundation of our company many years ago. I'll give you a quick history about A123 Systems, and one of the things that's unique about our company is that the first dollar that came into our business when we were just 3 people out of MIT came from the Department of Energy. It was, at that time, I would say 8 years ago, venture capitalists didn't want to have anything to do with anything that had more than one. Basically, if it had a wheel on it, they didn't want to touch it. So from a point of view of transportation, it wasn't really a sexy place to be investing at that time. And the Vehicle Technologies Office at the Department of Energy was very supportive and provided us with a $100,000 SBIR grant. Subsequently, we raised venture capital from Sequoia and other leading venture firms. And so we thank them for that. We're today one of the leading providers of phosphate-based lithium-ion. That's a specific chemistry. We've raised over $350 million pre our IPO, which was about a month ago, and since then we have an additional $440 million of cash that we raised. We have close to 1,900 employees in the business, and we've been supported quite a bit by General Electric, who's grown to be our largest shareholder. We are a leading recipient of USABC funding, about $27.5 million through 2 programs, and we have a plan to invest about $1 billion as a company over the next 3 years to expand capacity, a lot of it with support from the government. We've been validated by lots of customers. You can see them here in this list, and I think one of the unique things about our company is that we are not only in mass production with large customers like Daimler, and this year we're starting production also with Volvo and Magna, but also with customers outside of automotive in the electric grid, companies like AES that use our products, et cetera. This is an interesting slide, and it goes to the point that the technologies that you're going to see over the next 5 years are going to enable a brand new set of performance that really wasn't available before, and we're really employing new technologies. And that's what's going to allow us to do things that are very different. I have a slide here that shows you a little bit about the different products that we make. We started with power tools, which is in the far left, and you can see in the middle these very large grid installations of multi-megawatt size grid storage, and we're the leading supplier of products in that space. So if you had a large solar plant or a large wind farm, you can then use these products to integrate those renewables into the grid. And then on the far right, we're the largest supplier of batteries for heavy-duty hybrids. So in the picture at the bottom right, you see the Orion 7 bus is the #1 selling hybrid bus in the world. So if you go to New York City and get on a bus and it says Clean Air Hybrid on it, it probably has our batteries in it. I think we all agree that if you're going to have more efficient transportation, you're going to need to use electric drive components in that transportation mix, because electric drive is a lot more efficient than internal combustion systems. And there's many studies that project this is going to be a very large market, and we need the United States to have a competitive slice of that pie. This is a study from A.T. Kearney that projects in the passenger segment alone that this will be a $74 billion market by 2020, which is a significant opportunity for lithium-ion. Like Secretary Chu mentioned earlier, a lot of this production today has occurred overseas in Asia, in places like Japan and Korea and China. We are aggressively moving to put production in North America, but we're also securing customers in those regions, which is actually unique. We make the batteries for the ROE 750, which is the first mass-produced hybrid by a Chinese OEM with Shanghai Automotive. We announced today a partnership with Ishikawa-Jima Harima Heavy Industries, which is a very large company out of Japan that's a major tier 1 to all the major Japanese OEMs, and we're working on several programs to get share not only in North America and in Europe, but also go straight to where our competitors' home base is, which is Japan and Korea. This shows you a quick list of some of our customer traction and companies that we work with. And if you look at that commercial footprint, you can see that a lot of it is still in development, but there is a portion that's already in mass production, like what you see on the far right of this chart. And I would say it's interesting to note that some of the leading customers, like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, have selected our products for production to compete with their Asian counterparts like Lexus and other brands that they now see a significant competitive threat with. So we look forward to serving that market aggressively. We make products. This is an interesting point in terms of technology, because if you think about a Prius, the power density of a Prius is about 1,500 watts per kilogram. And what you see on this chart is about 20,000 watts per kilogram. This is a product we developed for the Formula One market for Mercedes-Benz. And it's a significant performance differential. If you look at most of the competitive products in our space, they're in the 3,000 watt per kilogram range. So we have in the United States, a significant technology lead that we can then employ to really gain share in this space as we move forward. And I think that what you'll see is something similar to what happened in the solar industry. If you went back 7 or 8 years, the major producers were Sharp and Kyocera, and they really had #1 share at that time. And if you look at the market today, the #1 market share company is First Solar, which is a U.S. company, or you have other folks overseas, SunPower and Qcells, that are also of substantial size. But there was a change in the market share landscape over the last 7 years in that space. And I think you're going to see a similar change in the market share landscape in advanced batteries, especially large format. So I'm excited about that. The last point I want to talk to is really transportation and grid. There is a nexus there. And once you have batteries that last more than 10 years and have extreme durability, you can then start to employ them on the grid. Initially not in bulk energy, which would be the traditional charge at night, discharge during the day, but in ancillary services and frequency control. And that's a large enough market. We think it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity that I think will keep us busy for some time as new technologies allow us to go down that cost curve. So I'll show you what these batteries do is that they essentially allow you to integrate renewables into the grid by taking advantage of buffering capabilities that these batteries can provide. So I can show you some of these installations. This is one of the largest lithium-ion installations of a battery system ever, and you can see it's really grid-scale type stuff. These systems are in mass production. We can make systems as large as 200 megawatts with this architecture, and they really share a common architecture between going from a grid side to distributed energy side and down to the vehicle level. So I think there's a lot of promise in systems that can go through the whole spectrum. So I think last point I want to make is really in mass production, and I think we initially started production in Asia 4 years ago when we began producing batteries. But we have been moving, thanks to the Recovery Act and other efforts by the new administration, we've been move all of our production to North America. And we are building very large plants in Livonia, Romulus, and Brownstown. And we're doing that with support of several programs that you can see in this page. And that gives us a significant capital leverage that will provide us with a very competitive position going forward. All right. Just leave it
Rick,
at that.
I'm going to need you to stop. Yes, we can get to the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. It's a great story, and they're all great slides, but there's so many.
Thanks. All right.
So let me pose a question to you. Is there anybody in this room that doubts that we're on the cusp of the next industrial revolution? Hands up if you agree that we're on the cusp of it. Hands up if you're brave enough to say you don't agree with that. Okay, so this is a little bit like an evidence-based revival meeting where we're all agreeing with each other, right? I mean, we've seen lots of data. We've heard from one of the smartest guys on the planet. We know from Carol Browner that the policy environment is really, really good. But guess what? It's also really, really challenging. So what I would like to spend the next 10 minutes doing, since we're all part of this evidence-based revival meeting, is what can we do together to change minds so that more people believe it, so that more people see the evidence that we see, which is that this will create jobs, that this will improve energy security, that this will address climate change. Now, we were talking about it ahead of time. Chuck was saying this is a marketing issue. But I'd like to hear from you. And again, I think most of us are practitioners. What have you learned in changing minds and getting the word out that would be useful to everybody else so that we can all go forth and do it better? And please, when I call on you, just say your name and affiliation. Yeah, go ahead.
BJ Stanberry, Heliowood Corporation. I actually think rather than viewing it as marketing alone, I think part of the problem is workforce education and doing it in a holistic way. Here you've got panels of power generation, smart grid, you've got all the different components, but explaining to people in the workforce who have to go out and deploy this in order for it to have real impact, holistically, helping them understand how those pieces fit together, and frankly, even for the industry to understand how to best fit those pieces together, how to change the business model of the utility so that these different policy components can be adapted to combine the individual technological components of sustainability into a solution. That's a packaging and an education job and a workforce training challenge that I don't think we figured out yet.
Good. Good. Yeah, blue shirt. Blue shirt, that probably limits it a lot.
Raphael Coven, Green Spark Energy Solutions. We are a ESCO focused on deploying the latest and greatest energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions to large customer bases, supermarket chains, hospitals, universities, factories, et cetera. And I'll have to agree with the gentleman, but I would say that even more we find that there's a major skill shortage with large organizations in terms of people who could handle energy management and all the complexities that it's brought. Typically these people have been fairly low in the totem pole, not given a lot of responsibility, and they're paid to make sure that no one's too hot or too cold and that the lights are on. And that's how they're compensated. And getting the organization to change and consider energy, I mean, we guarantee the return on investment in energy efficiency, typically 6 months to 3 years. And it's amazing how many corporations can't pull the trigger on a 2-year payback. That's probably 20% of the time. That's too slow for them, and that's with a guarantee. And so working with the organization, even large retailers, some of the largest in the country, are sort of incapable of deploying anything on a multi-location, multi-facility basis. And that, therefore, we've gone into the turnkey solution providing across multiple facilities. But left to their own devices, it's extremely difficult for them. They don't have the staff, the expertise, or the trust with many of the traditional ESCOs to do this sort of work. It's organizationally, probably, we see that as the biggest challenge.
You're essentially saying your customers need to understand the value proposition better, because at this point they're paralyzed by the apparent complexity of the decision.
That and just the complexity of doing something and having their own people to do it and an organization set up to roll something out on a large basis.
Yeah. Okay, way in the back.
My name is Mike Jung. I work with Silver Spring Networks. We're very pleased to be working with Pepco as well as other utilities that collectively serve about 1 in 5 U.S. customers, connecting them to the smart grid. The suggestion that I offer up is, what if we sub-metered every member of Congress's office? What if we connected each of their offices to a solar panel made by Unisolar, maybe LED lighting from Cree, and maybe a power source from A123 Systems? What if we made it tangible, as you were saying earlier, to members of Congress so that they can go home, back to their districts, back to their states, and talk about what they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're touching and using in DC, so that we can make it tangible to the rest of America?
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, but
Yeah, it would be great to see solar on the White House too.
Your name?
Continuum Energy Solutions. I'm Kent Baki. And I just wanted to mention, I think one of the biggest opportunities is to focus on decoupling that's happened in California, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. I wanted to ask Mark or the gentleman from Cree if they have any suggestions on how we could focus on that as a national policy.
Say again the issue.
I'm suggesting that we, focus on decoupling, which has happened in several states, because the old model of making more and more energy, like you said from Cree, the CEO there can't, they're not going to make more money if they start using less energy until you have decoupling.
Let me, maybe I'll take a shot at this. We have decoupling in the state of Maryland. We're about to implement decoupling here in the District of Columbia on November 1st, and we will have decoupling in place in Delaware after our next base rate case in 2010. Chuck made a very important point. I want to thank him for the courage of saying it while I was sitting to his right around profit motive, but it's the right question, it's the right point, because what decoupling has done, and it's really been kind of a foundation stone in California why their energy efficiency has been so successful, is because you frankly just remove any disincentive that a utility, that a wires company would have, wherein that you are breaking the connection between volumetric driven revenue versus a number that's provided via a rate case. So it's also it's something that the president frequently comments on as part of his policy. So having regulators that have the foresight and the courage and the leadership to implement that is vital. And I can tell you as a CEO who has to respond to my shareholders that it's an important part of our business case. So yes, it's been very important.
I wish it were the same in Virginia. Just because it's going to be a struggle in Virginia, how can we get it on a more national basis?
Well, you can move here to DC.
Well, and so we unfortunately only have time for sort of one more idea before we let the secretary kind of wrap us up here. So go, yeah, right back there.
Thank you, Mark Schutz from Reflex Plastics. And your question was how to get more people to see and understand. And I've had some interesting dialogue over the last several years with people that are both skeptical and cynical about the whole energy front, and I've been dealing with that headwind, if you will, at a personal level with various folks. And I think that what we need to do is very clearly articulate the objectives that we're trying to accomplish, such as what Secretary Chu presented today on greenhouse gas reduction and the dependency on foreign oil. We need to establish what those policies are that will really aim at those high-level objectives that everybody can understand why those high-level objectives are important. And then we really do need to employ market forces creatively to help drive the economy to that type of a structure. And what I think some of the skeptics and cynics that I've talked to have trouble with is there's a perception that we're somehow anti-market forces or something like that, which is not the case at all, but it can be perceived that way. So I think if we define the objectives, set the policies in that direction, and then creatively use the power of the free market to drive that way, then we can be successful.
That's great. That's great. Look, seeing is believing. Hearing about something is almost as important. One of the things I learned from, again, the time that I spent working as an advocate on climate change stuff is that if you ask most Americans who they listen to, there were two names that came up at the top of the list. This is a couple years ago, Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates. But then the next category is I listen to my friends. So here's kind of what if I could be so bold as to give you guys a little bit of a homework assignment. I'd love you to do a couple things. I'd love you to make sure that your local newspapers that you're talking to them. You're talking to them about the importance of this issue because they're actually going to be excited about the businesses, the jobs that you're creating in those local communities. And you know, as I've experienced when I've gone around the country looking at weatherization things, these are stories that there's an appetite for them and they need to be told, but they're better coming from you guys in your hometowns. So that's number one. Number two, have some conversations with people that you're dealing with, your friends, or maybe not your close friends, and persuade those people. That might be a little bit difficult. One of the things that Procter & Gamble discovered over the past 10 years or so is the power of word-of-mouth marketing. So have those conversations. Be brave and have those conversations. I mean, I think it was Chuck that said part of the power of the Recovery Act is people started talking about efficiency. So talk about it. So, and with that, I'd actually like to turn this back over to our esteemed Secretary of Energy to close us off. And for my part, thank you for coming. I'd like to keep the conversation going with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So I just wanted to make a few remarks concerning this. A comprehensive energy bill is before the Senate. I look to you to make your views known. Your business leaders in the community, you know it's going to need some effort. There are other business leaders in the community who may not share the views you share. Their voices are being heard. Yours should be heard as well. I think one of the things I also want to say is that in listening to some of the conversation and the talk about decoupling, let me add a little bit to that, because I'm from California. We call it decoupling plus, and that is if you want to give incentives to utility companies, power companies, but the real incentives, and this is one way of thinking about it, there's a target of expected energy production or increase in energy production. You want to make sure that the shareholders are going to get a good return on the profit. So if there's a projected increase and you say, if you can have programs that really work and you fall below that increased sales, you will actually make more money per unit of electricity, so that the incentive to save electricity versus the choice of building a new power plant, you will make more money by not building that power plant and decreasing the increase in energy. Once you align it that way, not that your costs will be covered for energy efficiency, but you actually make it an integral part of your business plan to actually make more money by saving energy, then you really get something going. And we want to keep the power and utility companies whole. We want them to get a healthy return on investment. And it's only when you get what we call decoupling plus at work, then you get really sincere efforts. And in fact, in California, the utility companies this is a major part of their business plan because it's a major part of their profit. And so that's one of the things that we need to get going. It's not only decoupling. So look, I want to thank you all for being here. It's great. I apologize. Some of you might have noticed I was typing into a computer. I was writing an op-ed piece on energy efficiency. I'm sorry I have to do things like that because I find that if I don't have live in parallel universes, I don't, 36 hours in a day that normal people have is just not enough. So anyway, thank you all for coming here, and I hope you go out there and spread the word around of what the things we've got to do, what the things we should do, and this is a great business opportunity for the United States. Thank you.